ACT claims the English test measures your ability to understand the rules of standard written English. Okay, now that's worth noting. Remember, the ACT is measuring the rules of written English. This means that you can't approach these questions the same way that you would a conversation. The most important thing that you need to know is that your ear is your worst enemy on English questions. The right answer is based upon what the rules of grammar are, not based upon which things sound okay and which things don't. The problem, of course, is that English has thousands of rules, and unfortunately, there's no such thing as the big book of standard written English that we could consult when we're studying for the ACT. What we do have, however, are all the ACTs from the past few decades. And by looking at these tests, we here at the Princeton Review have realized that, you know what? The folks who write the test are getting pretty predictable. They like to test the exact same English rules in the exact same way year after year. For example, I can guarantee you that you're going to see about 10 punctuation questions, and more than half of those are going to be about commas. You don't have to go nuts trying to memorize every single rule. All you got to do is learn which rules the ACT likes to test and how it likes to test them. The ACT English test will give you 45 minutes to answer 75 multiple choice questions. These questions will be spread out over the course of 5 passages. Each passage will have 15 questions. So let's take a look at what some sample questions look like. The students, comma, who had been studying the space program, comma, were thrilled to witness the lunar landing. A, no change. B, whom has been studying the space program, comma. C, whom had been studying the space program, comma. D, who had been studying the space program. Remember what I said at the beginning. Passages on the English test have 15 questions each, so this is obviously just a small part of a much longer passage. Here, we're given a sentence with part of it underlined. What your job is to look at the answer choices and pick which one is the best version of the underlined portion. For questions like this, the first answer choice will always be no change. Let's see how to crack it. Well, a really useful approach for these kinds of grammar questions is to look for differences in the answer choices. Often, the way that each answer choice treats certain words and phrases can give you a hint as to what grammar rule the question is testing. Here, answers A and D say who, and answers B and C say whom. Ah, who versus whom. Now this one's a doozy. The problem most Americans have is we think that whom is a word that only British people use, like thou or ye. Well, it turns out that the big difference between who and whom is whether or not the word is a subject or an object, which is actually the same difference as between he and him. So, if you're stuck between who and whom, one great way I found to think about it is to remember that I, who, and he all have vowel sounds and are all subjects, while me, whom, and him all have M sounds and are objects. So if you can't make up your mind, try replacing who or whom with he or him instead. Let's give it a try. Would it be correct to say he had been studying the space program, or him had been studying the space program? Well, besides the fact that saying him had been studying sounds a bit too much like Tarzan, since we're dealing with the subject of the verb had been studying, we need to say he, and therefore pick who instead of whom. This lets us get rid of answers B and C. We're down to 2. Great job. So now if we're stuck and need to guess, we have a 50-50 shot of getting it right. But we're not beaten yet. Let's take a closer look at those answer choices and see if we can find any other differences between A and D.
Okay, now the only other difference between A and D is that A has a comma at the end of the underlined portion and D doesn't. So do we need that extra comma? Well, if we don't have the comma, the sentence reads, the students, comma, who had been studying the space program were thrilled to witness the lunar landing. This leaves us with a sentence fragment, as neither the students nor who had been studying the space program were thrilled to witness the lunar landing is a complete sentence. So now we know that we need that extra comma. Get rid of D, the answer is A.
Not all the questions on the English test are about the rules of grammar, however. The ACT also likes to test what are called rhetorical skills. These questions are not about what's right or wrong, but rather what best conveys the meaning of the sentence. These questions make up about half of the questions on the English test. Funds provided by the Stafford Program are not considered scholarships, semicolon. So too, comma, they are part of the extended student loan system. F, no change. G, in addition. H, rather, comma. J, moreover. Okay, first things first. Notice how the answer choices switched to F through J? Why'd they do that? Well, the ACT likes to alternate between A, B, C, D and F, G, H, J. Why do they skip I? Who knows? That's just what they do. Okay, the second thing you should notice is that the answer choices now contain words which serve as transitions. So how should we approach this? Well, if the second part of the sentence contains an additional thought, then you'll need a similar transition. But if the second part of the sentence contains a contrary thought, we're going to need a contrasting transition. So let's take a look. The first part of the sentence says what the Stafford Program is not. The second part of the sentence says what it is. These are contrary thoughts, so we need a contrasting transition. Let's look at the answers. F says, so too, which would work for an additional thought, but not a contrary one. Eliminate F. G says, in addition, which is also a transition between similar thoughts. Eliminate G. H says, rather, which is a contrasting transition, so keep it. J says, moreover, which again shows a similarity between the two parts of the sentence. Eliminate J. The answer is H. Some of the questions on the English test look like they escaped from the reading test. They might ask you to identify the author's main idea, or to weaken or strengthen the author's main point, or to rearrange the sentences within the paragraph, or to rearrange the paragraphs within the passage. You might want to consider saving these weirder kinds of questions for absolute last, and make sure that you nail the easier questions first. Part 2 of Cracking the ACT goes into much more detail on all the different types of questions that you could see on the test. Okay, let's recap. The most important thing that you need to remember on the English test is that the ACT is not measuring spoken or everyday English, it's measuring ACT English. This means you can't rely upon your ear to tell you what's right or what's wrong. What you want to do is when attacking the questions is look to the differences among the answer choices and use those differences to figure out what rules the question is testing. Now there may seem like a lot of rules to remember, but if you focus on those that are outlined in Cracking the ACT, you should start to see improvement right away.